In this thought-provoking story, we follow Bryce Carter, a billionaire founder of a luxury fashion empire who embarks on a personal mission to confront prejudice within his own flagship store. After experiencing discrimination firsthand, Bryce takes decisive action to transform not only the culture of his store, but the values of his entire brand. Along the way, we witness powerful moments of change, heartfelt reflection, and the unshakable determination to build a legacy rooted in inclusivity and respect. Before we dive into this gripping tale of transformation and redemption, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this inspiring story, don't forget to subscribe. Bryce Carter stood on the bustling sidewalk outside one of the flagship stores of his luxury fashion empire. The glowing New York City lights illuminated the sleek marble exterior, a testament to the success he had built from nothing. But tonight, the grandeur of the store felt hollow. Bryce, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, adjusted his hood, gazing at his reflection in the store's glass facade. To the passers-by, he was just another ordinary man, far removed from the billion-dollar brand that bore his name. This visit wasn't about business or boosting sales. It was personal. Bryce had heard troubling whispers and rumors of customers being treated poorly and dismissed based on appearance rather than substance. These stories cut deep, not just because they betrayed his company's ethos, but because they reminded him of his father. His late father, Leonard Carter, was a man of quiet dignity who endured countless silent humiliations in similar places. As Bryce entered the store, the familiar aroma of polished leather and faint cologne greeted him. Soft jazz played in the background, blending with the meticulously designed elegance of the space. On the surface, everything looked perfect, but Bryce's sharp eye noticed the undertone of sterility among the staff. They moved efficiently, but with an air of cold detachment, barely acknowledging customers unless they met a certain unspoken standard. "Good evening," a cheerful voice interrupted his thoughts. Bryce turned to see a young woman with a kind smile and a professional demeanor. Her name tag read Rachel. "Can I help you find something today?" Bryce was about to respond when another figure approached. Mason Reed, the store manager, appeared beside Rachel, his sharp suit and rigid posture contrasting with Bryce's casual attire. His voice, colder and more authoritative, cut through the air. "I'll handle this, Rachel." Rachel stepped aside, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. Bryce noticed it, but before he could say anything, Mason's attention shifted fully to him. With a quick glance at Bryce's outfit, Mason's lips curled into a faint, condescending smile. "We're closing soon," Mason said curtly. "If you're looking for something specific, you'll want to make it quick." Bryce held back a sharp retort, forcing himself to remain calm. "I'm looking for a black trench coat," he said evenly. "Something high-end." Mason raised an eyebrow, his gaze drifting back to Bryce's hoodie. It was a look that screamed disbelief. "Our premium collection is in the back," he replied dismissively, "but it might be out of your range." The insult hung in the air like an unwelcome guest. Bryce considered revealing his identity right then, exposing the truth of who he was. But this wasn't about his ego. He needed to see how deep the problem ran. "I'd like to take a look anyway," Bryce said, keeping his tone measured. Mason shrugged and led him through the store, passing rows of exquisitely tailored suits and meticulously displayed shoes. Unlike typical sales associates, eager to describe the craftsmanship or story behind each item, Mason remained silent, his disinterest palpable. When they reached the back, Mason gestured lazily at a rack of coats. "There. That's the section." Bryce nodded and approached the rack, running his fingers over the fine wool and detailed stitching of one coat. The craftsmanship was everything he had envisioned for his brand. But his attention was drawn to the price tag, which had been conspicuously turned outward. A deliberate move, Bryce thought, to deliver a message. "This isn't for you." "This one looks good," Bryce said, lifting the coat off the rack. Mason's lips twitched into a mocking smirk. "Sure, you don't want to check the price first?" he sneered. "It's a little steep for casual shoppers." Bryce tightened his grip on the coat, his mind flashing to memories of his father. How many times had Leonard Carter faced this exact kind of disdain? Bryce inhaled deeply, steadying the storm of emotions brewing beneath his calm exterior. "No need," Bryce replied coolly. "Ring it up." For a brief moment, Mason blinked, clearly caught off guard. He wasn't expecting such confidence, but the sneer quickly returned as he led Bryce to the register. As they approached, Bryce noticed Rachel, the earlier saleswoman, watching him from across the room. She offered a hesitant smile, her eyes apologetic. Bryce gave her a slight nod in acknowledgement. At the register, Mason tapped in the price with exaggerated slowness, glancing at Bryce as though waiting for him to change his mind. When Bryce handed over his card, Mason hesitated before processing the payment. The confirmation beep felt louder than usual. Mason's face barely hid his disbelief as he handed the coat back. "Enjoy your purchase," he said, his tone void of sincerity. Bryce slid on the coat, letting its weight settle over his shoulders. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, his hand resting on the handle. Without looking back, he said quietly, "I'll be back tomorrow." Mason didn't respond, but Bryce could feel the tension lingering in the air as he stepped into the cool night. The streets of New York bustled with life, but Bryce's thoughts were elsewhere. The coat felt heavier with each step, a reminder of how much work lay ahead. His father's memory resurfaced, unbidden but welcome. Leonard Carter had endured this kind of treatment countless times, silently bearing the weight of prejudice and discrimination. Bryce's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about Mason. This wasn't even about the store. It was about ensuring no one else ever felt the way his father had. Dismissed, disrespected, made to feel small. Tomorrow, Mason would see him again. But this time, Bryce wouldn't be a nameless customer. He would be the man who owned everything Mason thought he controlled. The battle had just begun. The following morning, Mason Reed arrived at the Carter Enterprises headquarters, confident as ever. He had received a summons from Bryce's assistant, Natalie, to discuss the flagship store's performance. To Mason, it felt like just another routine meeting, an opportunity to showcase his expertise in running a high-end retail space. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that hugged his frame a little too tightly, Mason strode into the sleek glass building. The marble floors gleamed under the morning sun, and the modern, minimalist decor of the lobby screamed success. "Mr. Reed?" Natalie's voice was calm and professional as she greeted him. She stood by the elevators, holding a tablet. "Mr. Carter is ready for you." Mason straightened his tie, nodding curtly. "Thank you." The elevator ride to the 45th floor was swift, but Mason couldn't shake the faint feeling of unease creeping into his chest. Something about this meeting felt different. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into an expansive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline. Bryce Carter was at the head of the long glass table. Gone were the hoodie and jeans from the previous night. Instead, Bryce was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, exuding authority and control. "Mr. Reed?" Bryce said, his tone even, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Mason hesitated for a fraction of a second before masking his uncertainty with a practiced smile. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said as he sat down. Bryce leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. Mason shifted uncomfortably under Bryce's gaze, the air thick with unspoken tension. "I assume this is about the store's quarterly performance?" Mason began, his voice steady but edged with nervousness. Bryce's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll get to that," he said. "But first, let's talk about yesterday." The color drained from Mason's face. His mind raced to recall the details of the previous day. The man in the hoodie, the coat, the subtle tension in Rachel's demeanor. "Yesterday?" Mason echoed, his voice faltering slightly. Bryce leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You had a customer come into the store," he said evenly. He was dressed casually, looking for a coat. Realization dawned on Mason's face, and his confidence crumbled as Bryce continued. "That customer," Bryce said, his voice now ice-cold, "was me." For a moment, the air between them froze. Mason's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to process what he had just heard. "You?" Mason stammered, his carefully constructed facade cracking. I didn't realize." "No," Bryce interrupted, his tone sharp. "You didn't realize. You didn't ask. You didn't bother to treat me like a person worthy of your time or respect because of how I looked." Mason's hands fidgeted on the table, his confidence evaporating. "Mr. Carter, Bryce cut him off again, his voice rising slightly. "You implied I couldn't afford a coat in my own store. You dismissed me, not because of anything I said or did, but because I wasn't dressed the way you thought I should be." "I was protecting the brand's image," Mason blurted out, his voice tinged with desperation. "You have to understand, Mr. Carter, we cater to a certain clientele. I thought I was making the right call." Bryce's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Protecting the brand?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "By turning away customers who don't fit your narrow view of what wealth looks like? By undermining the values I built this company on?" Mason swallowed hard, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of Bryce's words. You didn't mean to treat me like I didn't belong?" Bryce interjected, his voice sharp and cutting. "You didn't mean to betray everything this company stands for? Is that what you're trying to say?" Mason's face flushed with embarrassment. "I made a mistake," he muttered. "I can fix it. Let me prove it." Bryce leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about yesterday, Mason," he said. "This is about a pattern. I've been hearing complaints for months. Customers turned away, employees treated poorly, and now I've seen it firsthand." Mason's breathing quickened as he realized the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Carter, please," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been loyal to this company for years. One mistake shouldn't define me." Bryce shook his head, his expression resolute. "This isn't one mistake, Mason. It's a culmination of choices you've made, choices that have poisoned the very foundation of this store." Mason's eyes widened in panic. "You can't fire me," he whispered. "I've built that store up." "You built it on the wrong values," Bryce said, his voice cold and final, "and now it's crumbling. Effective immediately, your time with Carter Enterprises is over." The words hit Mason like a blow. He sat frozen, his shoulders slumping as defeat washed over him. "Please," he whispered, his arrogance now replaced with desperation. "Give me one more chance." Bryce stood, his imposing presence towering over Mason. "I gave you a chance when I walked into that store yesterday," he said, his tone cutting through the silence like a blade. "And you showed me exactly who you are." Without another word, Bryce turned and walked toward the door. Natalie was waiting just outside, her tablet in hand. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "It's done," Bryce replied, his voice low but firm. "Send word to Rachel Moore. She's the interim manager now." Natalie nodded, jotting down a note. "I'll inform her right away." Later that afternoon, Rachel Moore entered Bryce's office, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She had been the assistant manager under Mason and had always sensed something was wrong with the store's culture. But she had never expected to be thrust into the role of leadership so suddenly. "Rachel," Bryce said, his tone softer now, "thank you for coming. Please, sit." "Of course, Mr. Carter," Rachel replied, taking a seat across from him. "I visited the store yesterday," Bryce began, leaning forward slightly. "And I noticed something. Among the coldness and indifference, you stood out. You were the only one who treated me with even a shred of respect." Rachel bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing my job," she said quietly. "You did more than that," Bryce said firmly. "And that's why I'm putting you in charge. The store needs new leadership, someone who understands what this company truly stands for." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "Me?" she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I'm just the assistant manager. I don't know if I'm ready for—" "You're ready," Bryce interrupted, his tone unwavering. "I've seen how you handle customers. You understand what this brand represents. Now, I need you to lead the change." Rachel took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady. "I know you won't," Bryce replied. As Rachel left the office, Bryce turned to the window, staring out at the city skyline. This was only the beginning. The real battle lay ahead. Later that evening, Bryce Carter sat alone in his office, the hum of the city faintly audible through the expansive glass windows. The confrontation with Mason Reed had left him restless. It wasn't just about the mismanagement of the store. It was about something deeper. Something personal. Bryce leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the framed photo on his desk. It was of his father, Leonard Carter, standing tall, his proud smile radiating strength and resilience. Bryce had always looked up to his father as a man of unyielding dignity, someone who had taught him the values of respect, perseverance, and humility. Yet, there was a quiet pain in Leonard's eyes that Bryce hadn't fully understood until now. With a sigh, Bryce reached for the photo. "You always saw more than you let on, didn't you, Dad?" he murmured. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Natalie stepped in, holding a folder. "Mr. Carter," she said cautiously. "You asked me to gather information about the flagship store's history." Bryce straightened in his chair, his curiosity piqued. "Yes, what did you find?" Natalie handed him the folder, her expression unreadable. "There's something in here I think you should see." Bryce opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. At first it was standard information, financial records, staffing reports, and customer feedback. But then he stumbled upon something that made his breath catch. A decades-old incident report is buried in the store's archives. The report detailed an incident involving a man named Leonard Carter. Years ago, before Bryce had even started his company, his father had been denied service at this very store. The reasoning? The staff at the time claimed he didn't look like the type who could afford their products. Bryce's hands tightened around the paper. His chest felt heavy, his thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. His father had told him stories of facing discrimination, but he had never mentioned this specific incident. Natalie hesitated before speaking. "There's more?" she said softly. "The employee who handled the situation back then?" It was Mason Reed. Bryce froze, the weight of the revelation hitting him like a tidal wave. His father had been humiliated by the same man who had dismissed Bryce the previous day. The connection was too significant to be a coincidence. "Did my father ever mention this to you?" Bryce asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Natalie shook her head. "No, but I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter. This must be difficult to process." Bryce nodded, his jaw tightening as he tried to make sense of it all. His father had endured so many quiet indignities that Bryce was only now beginning to comprehend. And now, decades later, Bryce was facing the same prejudice in the very empire he had built to challenge those biases. "Thank you, Natalie," Bryce said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I need some time alone." Natalie nodded and left the room, leaving Bryce to grapple with the memories of his father and the painful truths they unearthed. The next morning, Bryce woke early, his mind still preoccupied with the discovery. He couldn't shake the image of his father standing tall, despite the injustices he faced. Bryce knew he had to honor Leonard's legacy, not just through words, but through action. Arriving at the office, Bryce called Rachel Moore for an impromptu meeting. She entered his office cautiously, still adjusting to her new role as interim manager. "Mr. Carter," she said, her hands clasped nervously. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," Bryce replied, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been digging into the store's history, and I wanted to share something with you. It's personal." Rachel's brow furrowed in concern as Bryce recounted the story of his father and the incident at the flagship store. He spoke candidly, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "When I built this company," Bryce said, "I wanted it to stand for something more than just luxury. I wanted it to be a place where anyone, regardless of how they looked or where they came from, could feel valued. My father's experiences shaped that vision, but somewhere along the way we lost sight of it. And that's on me." Rachel listened intently, her expression softening as she began to understand the depth of Bryce's mission. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "I've always believed in what this company stands for. That's why I took the job in the first place. But you're right. There's a lot of work to do to get us back to that vision." Bryce nodded. "That's where you come in. I need your help to rebuild the culture of the flagship store. We need to change the way our employees think and the way they treat customers. It's not going to be easy, but I believe you're the right person for the job." Rachel took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I won't let you down," she said firmly. "I know you won't," Bryce replied, a hint of a smile breaking through his somber expression. That afternoon, Bryce took a rare moment to visit his father's gravesite. It was a quiet, secluded place on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by towering oaks and vibrant wildflowers. Bryce knelt by the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of Leonard Carter's name with his fingertips. "Dad," Bryce said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I've always admired your strength, your dignity. You taught me how to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock me down, but I never realized how deep the pain ran for you." He paused, his gaze drifting to the sky. "I promise you, I'm going to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel small, like they didn't belong. This company will reflect the values you instilled in me. I'll make sure of it." As the wind rustled through the trees, Bryce felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing one store or firing one problematic employee. It was about dismantling the systemic biases that had been allowed to fester, rebuilding his brand from the ground up to ensure it truly represented the inclusivity and respect his father had always stood for. Back at the office, Bryce called a meeting with his senior leadership team. He outlined his plans for a company-wide initiative to address the issues that had surfaced. "This is about more than one store," Bryce told them. "It's about the culture we've created or failed to create. We're going to start with the flagship location, but the changes won't stop there. Every employee, at every level, will undergo training on inclusivity and respect, and I expect each of you to lead by example." The team listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging uncertain glances. But Bryce's conviction was unshakable. "This isn't just about protecting the brand," he continued. "It's about living up to the ideals we claim to represent. And if anyone here feels they can't get behind that, I need to know now." The room was silent. No one spoke, but Bryce could see the weight of his words sinking in. As the meeting adjourned, Bryce felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. Rachel Noor stood at the front of the sleek, minimalist training room, her hands clasped tightly as she surveyed the small group of employees gathered before her. The room buzzed with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet resistance. The task Bryce Carter had given her felt monumental, changing not just behavior, but an entire mindset entrenched in the flagship store for years. The employees ranged in seniority. A few newer recruits looked uncertain but intrigued, while others, particularly longtime staff members like Kevin Foster, a senior salesperson, crossed their arms defensively, their expressions bordering on defiance. Rachel inhaled deeply, reminding herself of Bryce's unwavering faith in her. She had to set the tone from the start. "Good morning, everyone," Rachel began, her voice steady despite the nerves. "As you all know, there have been some significant changes in our leadership recently. Bryce Carter, our CEO, has tasked me with leading a transformation here at the flagship store." A murmur rippled through the room, but Rachel pressed on. "This transformation is about returning to the core values of Carter Luxe: respect, inclusivity, and accessibility. Our mission has always been to provide a luxury experience for everyone, no matter who they are or how they look." Kevin scoffed quietly, just loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Inclusivity?" he muttered under his breath. "Luxury is about exclusivity. That's what makes it special." Rachel's gaze snapped to him, her expression calm but firm. "Kevin," she said, addressing him directly, "I understand that's a perspective many of us might have grown comfortable with. However, exclusivity based on judgment or bias isn't what this company was built on. Bryce Carter founded Carter Luxe to challenge those ideas, not perpetuate them." Kevin shifted in his seat, his arms still crossed. Rachel made a mental note to address him further during one-on-one conversations, but decided not to let him dominate the session. The training began with an interactive exercise. Rachel handed out cards with fictional customer profiles, age, attire, background, and demeanor, and asked the employees to describe how they would approach each one. A younger staff member, Jenna, was the first to speak. "If I saw this customer," she said, holding up a card depicting someone in casual clothes, "I'd greet them politely, but I wouldn't push any products. They'd probably just be browsing." Rachel nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Jenna. That's a fair start. But let me ask you, if this customer is looking for a high-end product, how would you know unless you treat them with the same attention and enthusiasm as someone in a suit?" Jenna frowned, clearly thinking it through. "I guess I wouldn't know," she admitted. "I'd have to ask." "Exactly," Rachel said, her tone warm. "One of our biggest challenges is overcoming assumptions. Every customer who walks through that door deserves the same level of respect and attention, That's how we build trust and loyalty. That's how we grow. Kevin rolled his eyes. Loyalty? Please. People come here for the brand name and the exclusivity, not for small talk. Rachel turned to him, her voice steady. And what happens when they feel judged or unwelcome, Kevin? What happens when they leave? Not because of the price, but because of how they were treated. The room fell silent. Kevin looked away, clearly not ready to engage further, but Rachel knew her words had landed. The first session ended with mixed results. Some employees seemed genuinely interested in the new approach, while others, like Kevin, remained resistant. Rachel knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to stay the course. Later that day, Bryce Carter stopped by the training room unannounced. Rachel was alone, reviewing notes for the next session. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Mr. Carter," she said, standing quickly. "I wasn't expecting you." Bryce waved a hand dismissively. "Please, Rachel, call me Bryce, and I wanted to check in. How's it going so far?" Rachel hesitated before responding, unsure how much honesty to share. "It's a process," she admitted. "Some of the team is open to change, but others are holding on to old habits and mindsets." Bryce nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's to be expected," he said. "But I've seen enough to know you're the right person for this. Keep pushing." Rachel smiled, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Bryce. I'll do my best." The next session focused on real-world scenarios. Rachel divided the employees into pairs and had them role-play interactions with customers who didn't fit the stereotypical mold of luxury shoppers. One scenario involved a casually dressed man inquiring about an expensive watch. The role-play revealed underlying biases in how some employees treated customers they assumed couldn't afford the products. "Why waste time on someone who's clearly not buying?" Kevin argued when it was his turn to critique a scenario. Rachel stepped forward, addressing the group. "That's exactly the problem we're here to fix," she said firmly. "When we make assumptions, we're not just disrespecting the customer, we're limiting our own potential. That casually dressed man could be our most loyal client if treated with respect." Bryce, who had been observing quietly from the back of the room, stepped forward. His presence immediately commanded attention. "Kevin," Bryce said, his voice calm but direct, "do you know why I built this company?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "To sell luxury products, I guess." Bryce smiled faintly, though his tone remained serious. "Selling luxury products is part of it. But the real reason I started Carter Luxe was that I believe luxury should be accessible to anyone who seeks it, not just those who look the part." The room was silent, all eyes on Bryce. He continued, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the skeptics. "When my father walked into places like this, he was dismissed because of how he looked. I built this company to make sure no one else ever feels that way, and that mission is non-negotiable." Kevin looked down, the defiance fading from his expression. Over the next few weeks, Rachel continued the training sessions, refining her approach based on the team's progress. Bryce made a point to stop by regularly, offering words of encouragement and participating in discussions when necessary. Small victories began to emerge. Jenna, one of the newer staff members, started approaching every customer with equal enthusiasm, regardless of how they looked. A once skeptical employee even admitted that the new approach had led to an unexpected sale. The store's atmosphere slowly began to shift. Customers noticed the difference. Interactions felt warmer and more genuine. Feedback started to improve, and the once toxic culture began to dissipate. Rachel, however, remained focused. She knew there was still work to be done. One evening, as Rachel was wrapping up for the day, Bryce stopped her on his way out of the store. "You're doing a great job, Rachel," he said sincerely. "The changes are already noticeable." Rachel smiled, though the weight of the responsibility still lingered. "Thank you, Bryce. But it's not just me. The team is starting to come around." "Because of your leadership," Bryce said firmly. "Keep it up. This is only the beginning." As Bryce left, Rachel felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just managing a store, she was helping to build a legacy. The atmosphere in the flagship store's training room was tense. Weeks into the retraining initiative, some employees had started to adapt to the changes Rachel Moore was implementing. But resistance from certain individuals lingered. At the center of this pushback was Kevin Foster, the senior salesperson whose years of experience had made him confident, perhaps overly so, in his understanding of what luxury meant. Kevin leaned back in his chair during another session, his arms crossed as Rachel introduced the day's exercise. His expression betrayed boredom and skepticism, and his occasional muttered comments added an edge of disruption. "Today," Rachel began, her voice steady but firm, "we're going to discuss the subtle ways our biases can impact customer experiences. Whether we realize it or not, those biases affect how we treat people, and that treatment reflects on our brand." Kevin scoffed audibly. "What bias?" he said, his tone bordering on sarcasm. "I've been in this business long enough to know who's serious about buying and who's wasting time. That's just being efficient." Rachel met his gaze calmly. "And how do you determine that, Kevin? By what they wear? How they speak?" Kevin shrugged, unfazed. "It's common sense. People who can afford luxury usually look the part. If they don't, they're probably not buying." The room was silent, tension thick as other employees exchanged nervous glances. Rachel had prepared for this kind of resistance, but facing it head-on was always a challenge. "Kevin," Rachel said, stepping closer to his seat, "imagine if someone judged you the same way. If they looked at you and decided you weren't worth their time, how would that feel?" Kevin hesitated, his bravado faltering for a moment. "It's not the same," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Before Rachel could respond, the door to the training room opened, and Bryce Carter walked in. His unexpected presence immediately silenced the room. He surveyed the group, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention to Rachel. "Please, continue," Bryce said, gesturing for her to proceed. Rachel nodded, grateful for his support. "We were discussing how biases, conscious or unconscious, affect our interactions with customers." Bryce turned his attention to Kevin, who now looked noticeably uncomfortable. "Kevin," Bryce said, his voice calm but commanding, "do you believe in the mission of this company?" Kevin fidgeted in his seat, clearly unsure how to answer. "I believe in selling luxury," he said finally. Bryce folded his arms across his chest. "That's only part of it. The real mission of Carter Luxe is to make luxury accessible to everyone, to give every person who walks through our doors the opportunity to feel valued, no matter what they look like. Do you understand that?" Kevin hesitated again but nodded. "I hear what you're saying," he admitted, though his tone still carried a hint of reluctance. "Good," Bryce said. "Because if you don't fully understand or believe in that mission, you're in the wrong place." The room was silent as Bryce's words hung in the air. Kevin seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of the conversation, but he didn't argue further. Over the next few days, the tension began to ease. Kevin, though still skeptical, became quieter during the sessions, listening more than he spoke. Meanwhile, Rachel focused on the employees who were starting to embrace the new approach. Jenna, the younger staff member who had initially been hesitant, had a breakthrough moment during a role-play exercise. She was tasked with assisting a fictional customer, a middle-aged woman dressed casually and inquiring about high-end jewelry. "I'd start by asking about her preferences," Jenna said, her voice more confident than before. "Then, I'd show her a few pieces based on what she likes, regardless of how she's dressed." Rachel smiled. "Exactly. And how do you think that approach would make her feel?" "Like she belongs here," Jenna replied, her tone thoughtful. "Like she's just as important as anyone else." "Perfect," Rachel said. "That's the kind of experience we want every customer to have." Bryce continued to check in regularly, observing the gradual transformation in the team. One afternoon, he stood in the back of the training room as Rachel led a session on active listening. "Inclusivity isn't just about welcoming everyone," Rachel explained. "It's about making them feel heard. When a customer speaks, listen, not just to respond, but to understand. What they're saying, and sometimes what they're not saying, can help us meet their needs." Bryce watched as the employees practiced with each other, their interactions becoming more natural and genuine. He felt a glimmer of pride watching Rachel's steady leadership. After the session ended, Bryce pulled Rachel aside. "You're doing an incredible job," he said. "I can see the difference already." Rachel smiled, though she looked a little tired. "Thank you, Bryce. It's been challenging, but I think we're starting to turn a corner." "You definitely are," Bryce said. "And if there's anything you need, resources, support, whatever, just let me know." "I appreciate that," Rachel replied. But honestly, just knowing you're behind this makes all the difference. Despite the progress, resistance still lingered in subtle ways. Kevin, though less vocal, occasionally reverted to old habits during real customer interactions. One afternoon, Bryce observed him from a distance as he interacted with a casually dressed couple browsing the shoe section. Kevin greeted them politely, but quickly directed his attention to another customer, who looked more traditionally wealthy. Bryce watched as the couple left the store shortly after, their expressions tinged with disappointment. Bryce approached Kevin later that day, his tone measured but firm. "Kevin, I noticed how you handled the couple in the shoe section earlier. Do you think they felt valued during that interaction?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't trying to ignore them," he said defensively. "I just thought the other customer was more likely to buy." "And what if you were wrong?" Bryce countered. "What if that couple was here to make a major purchase but left because they didn't feel welcome?" Kevin didn't respond, his expression pensive. "Kevin," Bryce continued, "if we're going to build something better here, I need you to truly commit to this change, not just during training sessions, but every moment you're on the floor." For the first time, Kevin looked genuinely remorseful. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll do better." Small breakthroughs like this began to accumulate, slowly reshaping the store's culture. Employees started engaging with customers more thoughtfully, making fewer assumptions and focusing on creating positive experiences. One day, Rachel received a glowing review from a customer who had visited the store with her teenage son. "They treated us like royalty," the customer wrote. "Even though we were just browsing, the staff was so kind and attentive. My son walked out of there feeling like $1,000,000, and I can't wait to come back." Rachel shared the review with the team during the next session, her voice filled with pride. "This is what we're working toward," she said. "Moments like this are why these changes matter." Even Kevin, who had been one of the biggest skeptics, seemed moved by the feedback. By the end of the month, the flagship store felt noticeably different. The once cold atmosphere had warmed, and the employees carried themselves with a newfound sense of purpose. Customers, too, seemed to notice the shift, often commenting on how welcoming the store felt. Rachel, though exhausted, felt an immense sense of accomplishment. She knew there was still work to be done, but the progress they had made gave her hope for the future. As she prepared for the next round of sessions, Bryce stopped by her office. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "Thank you," Rachel replied, a soft smile on her face. "But we're just getting started." Bryce nodded, "and that's exactly why I know we're in good hands." The transformation within the flagship store was beginning to bear fruit. As Rachel Moore led her team through their retraining sessions, the initial resistance began to fade, giving way to small but impactful changes in the way the staff approached their roles. What had once been a store defined by quiet elitism now exuded a more welcoming atmosphere. Customers, regardless of their attire or demeanor, were greeted with genuine warmth. Staff members who had once been hesitant now seemed more engaged, focusing on the experience they provided, rather than assumptions about who their customers might be. Bryce Carter had been making unannounced visits to the store, slipping in quietly to observe the shifts taking place. He wanted to see the results for himself: small gestures, changes in tone, and the way customers lingered longer than they used to, no longer intimidated by the space. On one such visit, Bryce noticed Jenna enthusiastically assisting a middle-aged man in jeans and a worn jacket. She spoke with him as though he were the most important person in the room, explaining the features of a luxury watch with the same care she would offer to a suited executive. The man left the store smiling, carrying a neatly wrapped bag containing his purchase. Rachel approached Bryce as he stood near the entrance, watching the interaction. "Looks like she's getting the hang of it," Bryce remarked with a nod toward Jenna. "She's come a long way," Rachel agreed, pride evident in her voice. "At first, she was hesitant to change the way she approached customers, but I think she's starting to see the bigger picture." "And Kevin?" Bryce asked, his tone measured. Rachel sighed. "He's improving. Slowly. He's not as vocal in his resistance anymore, and I've seen moments where he genuinely tries, but there's still some lingering hesitation." Bryce nodded, his expression thoughtful. Keep working with him. Sometimes it takes longer for people to unlearn old habits, but I think he'll come around. In the weeks that followed, the store saw an influx of new customers. Word of mouth spread quickly, stories of a luxury retailer where every person, regardless of their background, was treated like they belonged. The staff began to take pride in this reputation, realizing that their efforts were paying off. During one particularly busy afternoon, a customer dressed in construction boots and a flannel shirt walked in, drawing a few curious glances from both staff and shoppers. Kevin was the first to greet him, his tone neutral but polite. "Good afternoon," Kevin said. "How can I help you today?" The man hesitated for a moment, as though unsure if he was in the right place. "I'm looking for a gift for my wife," he said finally. "Something special." Kevin led him to the jewelry section, explaining the various options with care. Bryce, who happened to be observing from a distance, noticed how Kevin's demeanor had softened. He no longer carried the air of someone making judgments based on appearances. Instead, he focused on helping the customer find the perfect gift. After the man made his purchase, a delicate diamond bracelet, he shook Kevin's hand. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You made this a lot easier than I expected." As the man left, Bryce approached Kevin. "Good job," Bryce said simply. Kevin turned, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, Mr. Carter," he replied. "I guess I'm starting to see what you and Rachel have been talking about. It's not about who we think they are. It's about treating everyone with the same respect." Bryce smiled faintly. "Exactly. Keep that up." Rachel's leadership continued to shine as she found new ways to engage the team. She implemented a recognition program, celebrating employees who embodied the company's values in their interactions with customers. Jenna was one of the first to receive recognition, earning a small bonus and a round of applause during a team meeting. "It's not just about the sales," Rachel explained during the meeting. "It's about creating an experience that makes people feel valued. That's the kind of legacy we're building here." Kevin, though quiet during the meeting, clapped along with the rest of the team. Later, he approached Rachel privately. "I wanted to say, thanks for not giving up on me," he said awkwardly, his tone sincere. Rachel smiled warmly. "Change isn't easy, Kevin, but you've made real progress, and it's not going unnoticed." Kevin nodded, a hint of gratitude in his expression. As the store culture began to solidify, Bryce decided it was time to share his vision more broadly. He called a meeting with the entire staff, standing at the front of the room as they gathered around him. "First, I want to thank all of you," Bryce began, his voice steady and commanding. "The changes I've seen here over the past few weeks have been incredible. You've taken on a difficult challenge, and you've risen to the occasion." The employees exchanged proud smiles, their confidence bolstered by Bryce's words. "But this is only the beginning," he continued. "What we're building here isn't just for this store, it's for the entire company." Carter Luxe was founded on the principle that luxury should be accessible to everyone. That's what sets us apart, and that's the vision we're going to take to every store in this brand. The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable as Bryce stepped back, allowing Rachel to take the floor. "I want to echo what Bryce said," Rachel added. "This has been a team effort, and I'm so proud of what we've accomplished together. Let's keep pushing forward and show everyone what Carter Luxe is all about." The positive momentum extended beyond the store. Customers began leaving glowing reviews online, praising not only the quality of the products, but the warmth and professionalism of the staff. One review in particular caught Bryce's attention. "I walked into Carter Luxe feeling out of place, like I didn't belong. But the staff treated me like I was their most important customer. It was a refreshing change from what I've experienced at other luxury retailers. This is how it should be." Bryce forwarded the review to Rachel with a short note. "This is why we're doing this." One afternoon, Bryce returned to the store to find Rachel talking with a new customer, a young woman dressed in a simple sundress. She was holding a sleek handbag, her eyes lighting up as Rachel explained its craftsmanship. Bryce observed quietly, noticing how Rachel's demeanor had a ripple effect on the rest of the team. Employees mirrored her energy and attentiveness, creating an atmosphere of genuine care. As the customer finalized her purchase, Rachel caught sight of Bryce and walked over to him. "Another happy customer?" Bryce asked with a smile. Rachel nodded. "She said she's been saving for months to buy that bag. She told me it was worth every penny because of how she was treated here." Bryce's smile widened. "That's the kind of experience that keeps people coming back." Rachel's expression softened, a mix of pride and humility. "It's what we're here for." By the end of the day, Bryce felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The flagship store was no longer just a place to sell luxury goods. It had become a model of inclusivity, a reflection of the values his father had instilled in him. As Bryce walked out into the evening air, he knew they were far from finished. But for the first time, the future of Carter Luxe felt brighter than ever. A quiet tension filled Bryce Carter's office as Richard Coleman entered. Richard, a former assistant manager under Mason Reed, had returned to the flagship store that morning asking for a meeting. The request had caught Bryce off guard. Richard's reputation under Mason had been far from stellar. Known for mirroring Mason's biases and poor leadership, Richard had contributed to the toxic culture Bryce and Rachel were working so hard to dismantle. "Mr. Carter," Richard said as he stepped into the room, his posture stiff but respectful. "Thank you for seeing me." Bryce gestured toward a chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat," he said, his tone neutral. Richard sat down, visibly nervous. His hands fidgeted in his lap, and he avoided meeting Bryce's gaze for a moment before finally speaking. "I wanted to apologize," he began, "for my actions when I worked under Mason. I know I made mistakes, and I let his leadership influence me in ways I'm not proud of." Bryce leaned back in his chair, studying Richard carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard hesitated. "Because I've been watching the changes happening at the store," he said. "And I realize now how wrong I was. I didn't see it back then, but Mason's way of doing things wasn't just bad for the customers. It was bad for all of us. I want to be part of what you're building. I know I can contribute if you give me another chance." Bryce remained silent, his expression unreadable. He could sense the sincerity in Richard's voice, but sincerity wasn't enough. Actions mattered more. "You're asking me to overlook a lot," Bryce said finally, his tone calm but firm. "I need to understand why I should trust you now, after everything that's happened." Richard's face tightened, his desperation evident. "Because I've learned from my mistakes," he said earnestly. "I see now what Carter Luxe stands for, and I want to help bring that vision to life. I'll do whatever it takes to prove I've changed." Bryce glanced at Rachel, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. Her expression was cautious, her arms folded across her chest. She had worked hard to rebuild the store's culture, and the idea of reintroducing someone who had contributed to its toxicity was clearly unsettling. "Rachel," Bryce said, turning to her. "What do you think?" Rachel hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I believe people can change," she said slowly. "But I also believe actions speak louder than words." Richard was part of a system that caused real harm, not just to customers, but to the staff who had to work in that environment. Letting him back in could undermine everything we've worked so hard to rebuild. Richard looked at her, his expression pleading. "I understand your hesitation," he said. "But I'm not that person anymore. I've changed, and I want to make things right." Bryce nodded thoughtfully. "Richard," he said, "do you understand the position you're putting me in? This isn't just about whether you've changed. It's about the trust of the people who stayed, who've worked tirelessly to fix what was broken. Bringing you back risks undoing that trust." Richard's shoulders slumped. "I understand," he said quietly. Bryce leaned forward, his voice softening slightly. "I appreciate that you've come forward to acknowledge your mistakes. That takes courage. But right now, I can't take that risk. I need to protect what we're building here, and that means moving forward with the team that's already proven their commitment to this vision." Richard's face fell, but he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand. Thank you for hearing me out." As Richard stood to leave, Bryce rose as well, extending a hand. "I hope you continue to grow," Bryce said. "And I hope you take what you've learned here and use it to make a positive impact wherever you go next." Richard shook his hand, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, I will." After Richard left, Bryce turned to Rachel. Was I too harsh? He asked, his tone reflective. Rachel shook her head. No. You were fair. We can't afford to take steps backward, not when we're finally making progress. Bryce nodded, though he couldn't shake the weight of the decision. Every step forward seemed to bring another reminder of the damage Mason's leadership had caused. And Bryce felt the responsibility of fixing it more acutely than ever. The next day, Rachel gathered the staff for a team meeting. She wanted to address the lingering questions about the store's direction and ensure everyone understood the importance of the changes they were implementing. As you all know, Rachel began, this store has undergone significant changes in the past few weeks. I know it hasn't been easy, and I want to thank all of you for your hard work and dedication. She paused, looking around the room. But I also want to be clear. This isn't just about improving sales or customer feedback. It's about creating an environment where everyone who walks through those doors feels valued and respected. That's what Carter Lux stands for. Kevin, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, raised his hand. I've been thinking a lot about what you and Mr. Carter have been saying, he admitted. And I think I finally get it. It's not about what people wear or how much money they have. It's about making them feel like they belong here. Rachel smiled, her heart lifting at Kevin's words. Exactly, she said. That's the kind of mindset that will set us apart, and it's the kind of leadership I want to see from all of you. The meeting ended on a high note, with the team feeling more unified than ever. Rachel felt a surge of hope as she watched the staff leave the room, their energy lighter and more positive than it had been in weeks. Later that afternoon, Bryce stopped by the store for another unannounced visit. He found Rachel near the entrance, speaking with a customer who was admiring a display of handbags. As the customer walked away with a purchase in hand, Rachel turned to Bryce, her expression bright. You're here again, she said with a smile. Should I start charging you rent? Bryce chuckled. I just wanted to check in. How's everything going? Rachel's smile softened. Better than I could have hoped. The team is really starting to embrace the changes. Bryce nodded, his gaze sweeping over the store. It shows, he said. The atmosphere here is completely different. It feels right. Rachel's expression turned serious. That's because of you, Bryce. You set the tone for all of this. Without your leadership, none of this would have been possible. Bryce shook his head. This was a team effort, Rachel. You've done an incredible job leading the way. I'm just here to support you. As the evening wore on, Bryce found himself reflecting on the day's events. Richard's visit, Kevin's change of heart, and the progress the store had made all weighed heavily on his mind. He knew the journey wasn't over, and there would always be more challenges to face and more battles to fight. But for the first time in weeks, Bryce felt a sense of peace. The flagship store was finally becoming the place he had always envisioned, a place where everyone was welcome, and where luxury was defined not by exclusion, but by excellence and care. The work wasn't done, but the foundation was stronger than ever. The flagship store was abuzz with activity as Rachel Moore finalized preparations for a special meeting. This time, it wasn't just another training session or routine check-in. It was a milestone event. Bryce Carter had invited employees from other branches to observe the flagship store as an example of the company's new direction. For the first time in months, Rachel felt a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. The changes she had worked tirelessly to implement were paying off, and the flagship store now served as a beacon of the inclusive vision Bryce had always intended for Carter Lux. As the meeting began, employees filled the store's sleek, minimalist conference area, their voices a low murmur of curiosity and expectation. Bryce stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding yet approachable. Behind him, a large screen displayed the store's mission statement, updated to reflect the company's renewed commitment to inclusivity and respect. Thank you all for being here today, Bryce began, his voice steady and confident. Over the past few months, this store has undergone a remarkable transformation. It hasn't been easy, but the progress we've made is a testament to the hard work and dedication of this team. He glanced toward Rachel, who stood off to the side, her expression equal parts pride and humility. When I founded Carter Lux, Bryce continued, I wanted it to be more than just a luxury brand. I wanted it to be a symbol of opportunity, where anyone, regardless of who they are or how they look, could walk through those doors and feel valued. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that vision. But thanks to the efforts of Rachel and this incredible team, we're back on track. The room erupted in applause, and Rachel felt her cheeks flush with a mix of gratitude and determination. The changes in the flagship store extended beyond customer interactions. Rachel had worked closely with Bryce and the company's HR team to update internal policies, ensuring that the new culture was supported at every level. Performance metrics now included customer satisfaction scores, with a strong emphasis on respectful and inclusive service. One significant change involved restructuring the onboarding process for new hires. Rachel and Bryce had collaborated to create a training program that emphasized the company's core values from day one, ensuring that every employee understood what Carter Luxe stood for. During the meeting, Rachel took the floor to explain these updates. "We've implemented a new approach to training and performance," she said. "It's no longer just about sales numbers or efficiency. It's about the experience we create for every customer. We're building something bigger than just a brand. We're building trust, loyalty, and community." One of the employees from another branch raised a hand. "How did you get the team here to buy into these changes?" Rachel smiled. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "Change is uncomfortable, especially when it challenges long-standing habits. But we started with small steps, open conversations, real examples, and a willingness to listen. Over time, the team saw the impact of these changes firsthand, and that's what made the difference." Bryce nodded, stepping back in to add, "Leadership matters." Rachel didn't just tell her team what to do. She showed them. She led by example, and that's what inspired others to follow. As the meeting concluded, employees mingled, sharing their experiences and ideas for how to bring the new vision to their respective stores. Bryce took a moment to speak privately with Rachel, his tone reflective. "You've done something incredible here," Bryce said. "This store is the proof we needed to show that change is possible, not just in how we operate, but in how we think." Rachel smiled. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Bryce. This was a team effort from start to finish." Bryce shook his head. "Leadership sets the tone, and you've set a tone that resonates with everyone here. I couldn't be prouder." The day wasn't just about celebrating success, it was also about acknowledging the challenges ahead. While the flagship store had made significant strides, Bryce and Rachel knew that scaling this transformation to the entire company would require ongoing effort and vigilance. After the meeting, Bryce returned to his office, where Natalie was waiting with a stack of reports. "These just came in," Natalie said, placing the papers on his desk. "Customer feedback from the past month." Bryce flipped through the reports, his brow furrowing as he scanned the comments. Overwhelmingly, the feedback was positive. Customers praised the welcoming atmosphere, the attentive staff, and the sense of belonging they felt in the store. One comment stood out. "I've shopped at Carter Luxe for years, but I've never felt more at home than I do now. It's not just about the products anymore. It's about the people. This store feels like it's for everyone." Bryce leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at his lips. This was what his father, Leonard Carter, had always wanted, a brand that brought people together rather than setting them apart. "Natalie," Bryce said, his tone thoughtful, "this isn't just progress, it's a turning point." Natalie nodded. "It's proof that your vision works, Bryce, and it's only going to get better from here." Later that evening, Rachel stayed behind to wrap up a few tasks. The store was quiet, the soft glow of the overhead lights reflecting off the polished marble floors. As she reviewed the day's events, Kevin approached her, his expression unusually serious. "Rachel," Kevin began, his voice hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Rachel replied, setting down her tablet. Kevin shifted awkwardly, his usual confidence replaced with an air of vulnerability. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up on me. I know I've been difficult, but I'm starting to see why all of this matters." Rachel smiled warmly. "Change is hard, Kevin, but the fact that you're willing to try means more than you know." Kevin nodded, a hint of gratitude in his expression. "I've learned a lot from you and Mr. Carter, and I just want you to know I'm committed to making this work." Rachel reached out and patted his shoulder. "That means a lot, Kevin, and I know you'll do great." As the flagship store continued to thrive, Bryce and Rachel began laying the groundwork for expanding the new culture to other branches. They organized regional training sessions, created a mentorship program pairing experienced staff with new hires, and launched an internal newsletter highlighting success stories from the flagship store. The momentum was undeniable. Customers noticed the difference, employees felt more engaged, and the company's reputation grew stronger. One afternoon, Bryce received a message from his sister, Camille, who had been following his efforts from afar. "Dad would be so proud of you, Bryce. You've done more than build a business. You've built a legacy." Bryce read the message twice, his heart swelling with emotion. Camille was right. This wasn't just about the success of Carter Luxe. It was about honoring the values their father had instilled in them, values of dignity, respect, and inclusivity. As Bryce stood in the middle of the store that evening, watching customers interact with the staff, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the future he had always envisioned, a future where everyone was welcome, where luxury wasn't about exclusion, but about connection. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Bryce felt like they were truly on the right path. The flagship store glowed warmly as twilight fell over the city. Inside, the energy was celebratory yet calm. Tonight marked a special event hosted by Bryce Carter, not just to honor the transformation of the store, but to celebrate the people who had made it possible. Employees and their families filled the store's open spaces, mingling under the soft light of crystal chandeliers. Guests sipped champagne and enjoyed hors d'oeuvres, their laughter and conversation a stark contrast to the cold, rigid atmosphere that had once defined the store. At the center of it all was Rachel Moore, smiling as she greeted attendees and answered their questions about the store's changes. Her presence was magnetic, a reflection of the leadership she had brought to the team. Bryce stood nearby, observing the scene with a quiet sense of pride. Tonight wasn't just about the store's success. It was about honoring the legacy of his father, Leonard Carter, and the values he had instilled in his children. As the clock struck 7 p.m., Bryce took the stage. The room fell silent as the crowd turned to face him. He stood beneath a banner that read, "Building the Future Together." "Thank you all for being here tonight," Bryce began, his voice steady and warm. "This isn't just a celebration of one store, it's a celebration of what we can achieve when we stay true to our values." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "When I founded Carter Luxe, I wanted it to be a brand that represented more than luxury. I wanted it to stand for opportunity, inclusivity, and respect. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. And that's on me." Bryce's honesty resonated with the room. Heads nodded, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But the past few months," Bryce said, "have shown me that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to rebuild. And that's exactly what we've done here, thanks to the incredible team at this store." He gestured toward Rachel, who stood off to the side, her cheeks flushing as the crowd turned their attention to her. "Rachel Moore," Bryce said, his tone filled with admiration, "has been the driving force behind this transformation. Her leadership, dedication, and unwavering belief in our mission have set a new standard for what Carter Luxe can achieve. Tonight, I want to honor her and thank her for everything she's done to make this vision a reality." The room erupted in applause as Rachel stepped forward, clearly overwhelmed by the recognition. Bryce handed her the microphone, giving her an encouraging nod. "Thank you, Bryce," Rachel began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "And thank you to everyone here. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every challenge. What we've built together isn't just a store, it's a community, a place where everyone feels welcome, valued, and respected. That's what Carter Luxe stands for, and I'm so proud to be a part of it." The applause was deafening, and Rachel's smile widened as she stepped back from the microphone. Bryce took the stage again, his heart swelling with pride as he looked out over the crowd. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Bryce slipped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The city buzzed around him, its lights glittering against the dark sky. He thought about his father, about the quiet strength Leonard had carried through a lifetime of challenges. Pulling his phone from his pocket, Bryce opened a message from his sister, Camille, who had sent him a photo of their father standing in front of the family's modest home. "He would have been so proud of you, Bryce," the message read. "You've taken his values and built something incredible." Bryce stared at the photo, his throat tightening with emotion. Leonard's smile was just as he remembered, full of warmth, wisdom, and unspoken pride. "You'd have loved this, Dad," Bryce whispered, "and I hope I've made you proud." The following morning, Bryce arrived at the store unannounced, as he often did. The energy inside was light and welcoming, with employees chatting easily with customers and each other. Rachel spotted him from across the room and quickly made her way over. "Good morning, Bryce," she said with a grin. "Should I be worried about the surprise visit?" Bryce chuckled. "Not at all. I just wanted to see how things were going." Rachel gestured around the store. "It's going better than I ever imagined. The team's morale is high, customers are happy, and sales have been steadily improving. I think we've hit our stride." Bryce nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. "You've done an amazing job, Rachel, and it's not just the numbers. It's the culture you've created here. This is what I always envisioned for Carter Luxe." Rachel's expression softened. "You gave us the chance to build something special, Bryce, and we're not done yet." Bryce smiled. "No, we're not. But this is a pretty great start." As the day went on, Bryce made his way around the store, taking time to observe the staff in action. One interaction caught his eye. A young woman in casual attire hesitated at the entrance, clearly unsure if she belonged. Jenna, one of the newer staff members, noticed her immediately. With a warm smile, she approached the woman and said, "Welcome to Carter Luxe. Can I help you find something today?" The woman relaxed visibly, stepping inside. "I'm just looking," she said softly. "Take your time," Jenna replied. "And if you have any questions, I'm here to help." Bryce watched as Jenna's kindness transformed the woman's hesitation into curiosity. Moments like this reminded him why the work they were doing mattered. At the end of the day, Bryce returned to his office, where Natalie was waiting for the latest round of customer feedback. She placed the folder on his desk with a smile. "You're going to like this," she said. Bryce flipped through the comments, his chest tightening with pride as he read words like welcoming, inclusive, and exceptional. One comment stood out. "Carter Luxe isn't just a store. It's an experience. From the moment I walked in, I felt valued and respected. This is what luxury should be." Bryce leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. This was the legacy he had always hoped to build, a brand that stood for something greater than itself. That evening, Bryce stood by the window of his office, looking out over the glittering New York City skyline. The weight of the past few months felt lighter now, replaced with a sense of accomplishment and purpose. He thought of his father again, of the quiet dignity Leonard had carried throughout his life. Bryce had built Carter Luxe to honor that dignity, and now, for the first time, he felt like he had truly succeeded. The journey wasn't over, but the foundation was stronger than ever, and as Bryce looked out over the city, he knew that the best was yet to come. The story of Bryce Carter and the transformation of his flagship store is a powerful reminder that leadership is not just about managing a business. It's about upholding values and creating an environment where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected. Bryce's journey from experiencing prejudice firsthand to reshaping the culture of his brand underscores the importance of taking bold steps to address systemic issues, even when they're uncomfortable or challenging. One key takeaway is that change starts with recognizing what isn't working and having the courage to confront it. Whether it's dismantling harmful practices or fostering inclusivity, true progress requires dedication, consistency, and a clear vision. Bryce's commitment to honoring his father's legacy and creating a more inclusive brand culture serves as an inspiring example for all of us. For businesses, this story highlights that a brand's success isn't just measured in sales or reputation. It's in the loyalty and trust it builds with customers and employees alike. Inclusivity and respect aren't just buzzwords, they're the foundation of a lasting legacy.